Hello and welcome to the 42 Minutes of Heaven we call the D1Baseball Podcast. I am your host, Michael Patrick Rooney. I want to say thank you to our good friends at Pitch Logic, the system used by players, coaches, scouts, and instructors at all levels of play, from youth leagues to the big leagues. Easy to use and affordable technology make the platform accessible to every player at every level. All the metrics and features used at the highest level. See pitchlogic.com for more information. I said 42 minutes. The truth is it's going to be 30 minutes or less, because my co-host here, the great Josephus Joe Healy, has a hard stop as he gets on to other podcasts. We are keeping Joe very, very busy. This is a rewind, a review, a recap of the ABCA meeting. Joe did an awesome job. I want to the listeners, I'm giving you homework right out of the chute. First podcast of 2025. Joe wrote two great articles recapping the ABCA meeting in Washington, D.C. that I would direct you to on the site. Joe, how are you feeling coming out of ABCA? Are you feeling? No, let me just leave it there. How are we feeling?
Feeling physically pretty good, but as I discussed with you before we went on the air, a little bit scattered because I am not unique in this because everyone experiences the holidays kind of the same. But I was hanging out with family over the Christmas and New Year's. That was great, no complaints there. But flew pretty much directly from that to ABCA, and now I'm back home for the first time in a while, and just felt and on top of that, and this is a good thing, we're really kind of on the fast track now to opening day. And so the discussions that we're having in our just D1 Baseball internal chat, the intensity of them has ratcheted up since we've been home from ABCA in terms of we need to do this, we need to do that, how, all of that kind of stuff. So the planning has started. So that's a beautiful thing. I love the season is almost here, but it has increased the level to which I'm feeling scattered since I got back from DC.
Yeah, it moves fast when you come back from there. So I'm with you. I am not good at sleeping at the ABCA. I tend to close the establishments, which those are self-inflicted wounds, Joe. I can't blame others for Coach Rooney's actions there, but I wouldn't change it either. I love the interactions.
I mean, and you wouldn't be the mayor of ABCA has to get out and see the people.
That's right. I pride myself on being a representative of the people. I'm with you.
Yeah.
So along those lines, Joe, let's do this. So the agenda for the pod is, and again, this is going to be 30 minutes or less. The agenda is I want to touch on new rules because this is a new rule cycle, 25-26. I want to touch on that'll be a flyby. The Division I meeting, the Thursday night meeting of the ABCA is always fascinating. This one was one of the more fascinating ones I can remember in years. We'll probably spend the bulk of the time there. And then, one of the coolest things about the ABCA is Friday morning, day one of the clinic kicks off with the winner of the Division I National Championship from the year before. That head coach does the first talk. And that was Tony Vitello this year. And he is I would argue the most fascinating person in our sport right now. And his talk was on brand there for sure. Joe, let's start with this though, before we jump into the agenda. And I'll go first to give you a chance to think. What was your favorite interaction? Now it could be one of your favorite interactions. I'm only asking for one of the ABC. I'll tell you what mine was. Ran into Justin Hancock. And he had been the pitching coach at Indiana State. He's a former big leaguer. He's an agent right now. And so we were talking about Indiana State and, he's transitioning his career. A lot of that has to do with family reasons. I thought he was just a phenomenal college pitching coach. And, we were talking about Indiana State, this incredible run they've been on. Mitch Hanna is now the coach at South Florida. And, this really cool blend of these tough old Midwest kids and then these kids from Latin America, Puerto Rico specifically. And, what they host a regional, they could have hosted a super regional. They play in a super regional in Fort Worth in front of 9,000 people per game. And he introduced me to Coach Warren, Bob Warren, who is the godfather of Indiana State, and Coach Warren's wife, Bonnie. My Notre Dame teams played against Coach Warren. We were telling stories about a game Craig Counsell went off against those guys, but that was a great program back in the just a cool. They've got incredible uniforms, so that was a highlight for me to get to. Tracy Archuleta, the current coach of Indiana State, he joined the conversation. So just to be able to to chop it up with all of those different constituents and important people at Indiana State baseball. That was a personal highlight for me. So go ahead, Joe. What do you got?
Everything coming up sycamores in that
so great
that conversation. Go Trees. I really enjoyed, from a very specific standpoint, talking to, I don't remember if you were there or not, Runes, but Skylar Meade, were you there? Yeah, you were there.
Yes.
Because great. I have always kind of wondered, and maybe one of these days I'll do a story on it, but I've kind of always wondered how these ABCA sessions come together, right? I mean, I know the like the broad strokes of it, right? Like the people, the coaches who are higher up as VPs in ABCA, that, you know, then they get elected and whatnot. Like they are in charge of putting the program together. So they kind of tap their contacts to do different sessions. They try to do a mix of D1 coaches, lower level coaches, high school coaches, travel ball coaches, mindset specialists, you know, mental training guys. So I know the broad strokes of it, but, you know, just talking to Skylar about how, you know, it was just kind of as unofficial as John McCormick coming up to him at USA Baseball and being like, hey, I've never heard anyone do something on this. Can you do this? Mm-hmm. And then, you know, and we joked that you could, like, who would dream of saying no to John McCormick? So, right. You know, like couldn't be me. So, you know, he ends up doing a session and crafting it. But just to hear kind of some of the backstory and how that came together, because let's face it, and we'll talk about this with Tony a little bit later. Let's face it, like, this is not like, yes, these head coaches are public facing people. So they do have to do some talking and some handshaking and some networking, but this is not really necessarily in their skill set. Some of the guys are really good at it. Like there are guys that just have that, and there's some that just aren't. Like it's not something they're comfortable with. And so, you know, it's not a light lift for these guys to do some of this kind of stuff. And oh, by the way, this is not a presentation in front of 100 folks at your local like clinic, you know, that you're doing this, like the, you know, State High School Coaches Association kind of deal. Like this is thousands upon thousands of people, many of whom you idolize, right? Yeah. So it's just a totally different setting. So to hear how that kind of came together was cool. And also, you know, Skylar Meade is pretty much exactly what you see is what you get with him. You know, just you know, the stylish jeans and a puffy jacket, and his hair is just perfect, you know, yes. And you know, he's chewing gum and only the way a cool guy can chew gum. And, you know, just a guy that, you know, I wish I was that handsome, frankly. So, but yes, the biggest thing there was just kind of hearing some of the backstory there, just because I'm fascinated by the process of something like that, especially given that for these coaches, that's not their job necessarily. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and coaches are typically really good in front of a crowd, but you're right, Coach, or Joe, like I heard it was 5,200 coaches there. It's intimidating. Like this is intimidating, like giving a best man speech for anyone that's ever done that, where it's like, even if you're comfortable in front of a crowd, this is a different level of pressure. And you're right, Skylar Meade, you know, what they're doing at Troy, you know, how talented he is. It makes me think, you know, if I go back and think about our fall reports, we were laughing about this at the ABCA. Aaron Fitt wrote the one on Troy. I think it was the very last, no, not the very last one, but one of the very last ones posted. And it's a banger because Skylar Meade is a great quote. Aaron is a great writer, and man, and they are a fascinating program in a regional 2 years ago, trending that way. And then just at the very end, a significant stub of their toes, and then they get left out. And so a very compelling program there. I would, oh, go ahead, Joe, go ahead.
I was just going to tack on there and say that also, you know, one thing you like about Troy is that they and programs like, I think of Georgia Southern, another program that's investing in their baseball program in facilities, are kind of a bulwark against some of what we fear in college baseball, which is just that if you're not one of the top 35 to 40 programs, you're just irrelevant. You know, a place like Troy, which now you could argue is a top 35 or top 40 program, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You know, those programs showing that, hey, you know, you could still invest in baseball. You can still compete at a high level in baseball, even as all of these headwinds are coming at you. Like Troy is, I think at this point, one of the, other than the teams like Southern Miss and Coastal that have kind of always been there, Troy is kind of the the new blood in that group that's trying to kind of push against that expectation that if you're not in the SEC, ACC, Big 12, that you might as well pack it up, right?
Mm-hmm. I would say before we do the rules, 2 sessions. I'm terrible at getting to all the sessions because I'm too busy politicking out in the hallways, to your point earlier. But UConn's entire staff did a session because they've been together so long. All 4 coaches were, and they have great history. Several of them played for Coach Penders. That is a session I'm going to go rewatch on the ABCA website. I also listened to the PitchCom presentation at the Expo Theater there, or the Expo deal, and it made me realize how little I know about PitchCom, and I'm going to do that. That's some homework for Coach Rooney there. So Thursday night, Joe, we do the rules, and the rules meeting is for divisions 1, 2, and 3 because we all have the same rules, and then they split out into the division meetings. I only have one takeaway from the rules because we are in the new rule cycle, is the double base. As I understand it, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong here, as I understand it, the double base is in play at first base this year, will be in play for the NCAA tournament. And what I didn't realize, and again, this is, I don't have an answer for the audience tonight. I have homework for you and for me. But what I'm pleased because I hate the collisions at first base, and the batter runner is in a lose-lose position because they start in fair territory. Basically, they have to get into foul territory and then come back into fair territory to touch the base. So that's the whole point. But what I didn't realize is there are rules for how you run towards the double base. And basically, if you're a batter runner and it's going to be a play at first, you're not to touch the white part of the base in fair territory. Your safety, you being safe, requires you to touch the colored part of the base. I had no idea. I just had never thought about it before. So that was very interesting to me, and a big takeaway that, hey, I've got some homework to do as far as understanding that. Go ahead, Joe. What was your takeaway from the umpire part?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start there. Because to me, that's the big one too. It's not just that; it's also that if you're sliding back into a base, you have to make sure you're touching then the white part, right?
Yes.
Which, I mean, that's pretty easy because you're sliding back that direction. But I can just see it, Runes, like a situation where you've got like an awkward runner gets caught him. You know how like a runner kind of gets caught leaning one way, but he's kind of close to the bag. So instead of sliding, he kind of falls back into it. I could see a scenario where runner's hand is kind of equally distributed between the white base and the colored base. And we're going to have to do like a Zapruder film, like zoom in to figure out were his fingers on the colored base first, or was his palm on the white base first? And then when was the tag applied relative to that? Like that, I mean, yes, that might happen once or twice over the course of a season, but I can see it now. We're going to have one of those deals where we're going to have to really get in the nitty gritty of what part of the runner's hand touch what part of the base and when. So it was, I got to say, more complicated than I imagined. Yeah. And, maybe it's a hard concept, so I'm not necessarily criticizing the presentation, because it's without being able to give people an actual like physical example. It's hard to explain something in words, but I know coming out of that session, I think you and I are similar in this way. I came out of it thinking like, "Hoo boy, this is not as straightforward as I thought it was going to be." When you just say we're going to have a double base, because at least in my mind, when you say we're going to have a double base, all I see is the upside of no more collisions, no more confusion about the running lane. I mean, at least not nearly as much. So I was excited about that, but now it's kind of like, oh, it's actually a little more complicated than I realized.
Yep. Hey, just to put a bow on that, so if it's a ground ball to short, your standard 6-3 ground ball, the color, the double base, the white part is in fair territory. The green part, I think a lot of them are going to be green, is in foul territory. So if you hit a ground ball to short as the batter runner, you are required to touch the green base. If you run down the line and touch the white base, that does not count as you hitting first base. You have to touch the color base. Now, if it's a ball to the outfield and you're making the turn at first, then you are allowed to hit the white part of the base. Where I did get myself mixed up, Joe, and this is where I've got homework to do, is if you have a swinging strike 3 and you are running and the ball kicks away from the catcher and you are running to first base, I believe you are allowed to touch the white part of the base, because in theory, the first baseman doesn't want to be in fair territory. The first baseman would want to climb over to foul territory to receive, let's say, the ball kicked away from the catcher towards the first base dugout. That's the strike 3 batter runner play is the one I've got a bone up on.
Well, especially because then as the first baseman, then you've got to be on the white base, right? You can't hang out on the colored base.
I'm blurry on it. They started to explain it and I got lost. So there you go.
Yeah. So, but I think that's case in point. Like, Runes and I understand the game pretty well. We were there and we're still kind of left feeling like, I'm not exactly sure I understand all this. I guess we'll just have to see. I guess I just don't see from a runner standpoint. I understand from the defender standpoint why you don't just want the first baseman standing on the colored base. And I don't know why you'd want to, other than that drop strike, third strike play. But from a runner standpoint, beating out a ground ball, like I guess I'm not entirely sure why it matters where they step, but I'm not the one who's making the rules, I guess. So
yeah, for sure. As a flyby, and then we'll get to the big part of the D1 meeting. There's a proposal for next year that will be voted on to go from 2 fall games, like 2 outside competitions, the fall to 4, which is great. Softball's got 8, so that's great. Especially as we shrink our rosters, I think that will be, in theory, you shrink your rosters, it's harder in a squad, but you could always play outside competition. And for us, basically we're fans. I think that's the outside competitions have been super fun. The other thing that I think is a good thing is next year they are proposing the first practice of the spring, if you will move up to 35 days from the first game. And that's really designed around give us more time to ramp up players and pitchers. Those were the other 2 big ones that I can remember.
Yep.
Go ahead, Joe.
I'm with you there. I think the 2 to 4 fall games I think is big. Mostly just because I'm all for like more interesting fall stuff. And Craig Kylitz, the executive director of ABCA, mentioned that there was briefly talk of trying to get 8, which is what softball has. And I get that, like, I guess I'd be good with there being 8, but I mean, you tell me, you were a coach. I was not, but I don't even, why would you need that many really in the fall? Like 8 seems like probably too many if I'm being honest, but again, I don't know. So I'm good with 4. I mean, that feels like a good number. So I'm happy to see that. And the 35, the interesting 35 days prior, the interesting thing about that is it does seem to open up, and not everyone can do this. If you're a team in the Midwest, Northeast, you got to start fall early because you got to get outside. But if you're a team that has the benefit of being able to go late with your fall, like I do wonder if more teams will do what I know some programs do out there, which is basically don't start your top pitchers throwing early in the fall, start them late, and then have them basically throw all the way through to opening day. So they have the 35 days prior gives you a little more room to be able to say, hey, we wrap up our fall on let's just say November 15th. And then, okay, you've got, 6 weeks of kind of throwing on your own, throwing on the side. But then after that, we'll be back on campus and hopefully, you can just kind of build from there, as opposed to having to take this big long break and then ramp up again in January.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think there'll be some creativity around that. Hey, just on the 4 fall games versus 8, like, so, Joe, I was a junior college coach, and what was traditional in junior college, I thought it was kind of awesome, is we would play 56 games in the spring. I'm talking about Arizona and Phoenix College for me, but we played 20 fall games. But I do think that structure reflects an old-fashioned development ideal where it's like, hey, just reps are the the golden commandment, if you will. I think today's environment is very much, training has changed tremendously, where you don't want just games every single day. You want more time for like training and remove yourself from the competitive results to just work on things. So I think that's where, if you're the ABC and Craig Kylitz, it's very smart. Like, if there's not a tremendous appetite for 8 outside competitions, and there is not, hey, don't ask for something that you're lukewarm if you want. So
Right.
Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, let's talk about the Division I meeting. So I'm going to try to level set us, Joe, and then I'm going to clear out for you. So if you think about we have the settlement that's impending, and but right now we're not in settlement rules, right? Like right now we're in the same rules we've had, and our current rules in baseball are this: you have to turn in a 40-man roster, as I understand it, the day before your first game in the spring semester. So that's when your 40-man roster is due, technically. But what's traditional is coaches will go through their fall period, and between Thanksgiving and the end of the semester, they will meet with their team and basically let everyone know who the 40 is going to be. And if you're not going to be part of the 40, then you're going to move on and try to find a junior college or NAIA or whatever it's going to be, right? But technically, the 40 is not due until right before your first game. So under the house rules, so you can be unlimited in the fall, get to 40 before your first game. Under this house proposal right now, house settlement proposal, you still can be unlimited in the fall. However, you have to get down to 34 players on December 1st. So there's like a new date that's a little bit, but that's really not changing anything, right? You could have as many guys as you want in the fall, and then you cut them after that period, and then you figure out what you're going to do, get to your 34 for the spring. Here's what the fear that has been expressed by the coaches and by the ABCA. Their fear is this: Mike Rooney University has 42 guys in the fall. I cut 8 of them to go to 34 on December 1st. And then just take my scenario times 300 schools. One of those 8 families decides to sue the NCAA saying, hey, this school cut me, and now you're telling me I'm ineligible to play Division I baseball that spring. That is unfair. Now, the fear is that the NCAA is losing every single lawsuit. So all it takes to change a rule is one lawsuit. Now, I understand the fear, and I think there's validity there, but I do think we've overboarded on the fear. Like, to assume that the NCAA is going to lose every single lawsuit forevermore, I don't feel that way. But I also understand. So here's the coach's fear. That will then green light mid-year transfers. And I'm pleased to know this, that the overwhelming majority, if not all the coaches, feel like mid-year transfers, Division I to Division I, would be an abject disaster. The tampering we have now would be on steroids. It would be just chaos. And so what they're saying is, let's get ahead of this as Division I baseball. Let's implement our own fall roster limit so that it's pronounced, and then we minimize our ability to be sued, so that because the ultimate goal is, let's be proactive so we never have to deal with the mid-year transfer again. Because remember, we had the mid-year transfer 20 years ago, so many of us have lived it. So Craig Kylitz, I give him great credit. It was a tough meeting to lead. So he was basically saying to the group, like, we need to make a decision tonight. Do we want to have no fall limit and just take our chances? Do we want to do 34 and so no one's getting cut? Do we want to do 36? Do we want to do 38? And so they landed on 38. But Joe, go ahead and take it from there. Like, anything I missed there, or anything you'd like to shape the conversation with?
Yeah, I think you ran down the particulars there pretty well. I thought it was telling in the meeting that it was done kind of in an open forum. And for the sake, I should say, for listeners, for the sake of keeping what is technically a closed meeting behind doors, like, Runes and I will tell you what happened, but we will keep proper nouns out of it when we talk about things that were discussed, just because that wasn't really for public consumption. So, but I thought 2 things struck me. One is that there was a real, I think, just the understanding of how much of a hot button issue, even take the house settlement stuff out of it. Roster sizes are just a hot button issue in baseball. And so it took a while. It kind of reminded me of a college class. Runes were like, the professor wants the class to talk, but it kind of takes a couple people talking to get everybody else warmed up. Yep. It felt a little like that. And then the second thing was what you mentioned, that I understand it, but was also kind of surprised how much of the conversation was just, let's not get sued, And like I said, I'm with you. I get it, but I was kind of shocked. I mean, considering how much time we have spent both just at ABCA and also just in college baseball more generally, that talking about we need to push for what's right for the game and doing what's right and all that. And now that the tenor of that has changed, because the motivators are different. And so while I get it, I was surprised by that. And I think, so what we land on, and I don't know if I'm bearing, or jumping ahead here, but we land on 38 as kind of the number that we're going to move. I say that college baseball is going to move forward with as a proposal. And I think Runes, I think what's good about it, a number of things, but I do think it serves a lot of purposes, because I do think, yes, to your point, it allows baseball to be proactive and say, here's our number, here's how we came to that number, here's what the concerns are, so here's why we came up with this, and 38 sounds reasonable. So I do think being proactive is good in this environment. B, it does minimize the likelihood of, because teams aren't cutting a dozen or more players at the end of the fall, they're cutting 4. And oftentimes, better than I do, Runes, having been in coaching, like a lot of times those 4 players kind of know the deal. Doesn't mean they're happy. It doesn't mean they're not going to make an emotional decision after the fact and do something they might, you pop off about something, but those 4 players tend to kind of know the deal. But then also let's be real. It also is kind of a positive for some of these teams that have limitations, whether they be academic or whether they just be kind of their administration saying, hey, you can't have, I know teams I did fall reports on, like, are working under 30 player roster limits at their schools, done, set by their administration. So there's these schools out there that have just said, why do we have 35 guys on campus every fall? And then this team up the road, that, by the way, doesn't need to have that many because they're in Omaha all the time, has 50 some odd, right? Mm-hmm. So I do think it serves a lot of purposes. I think some of them are just, I don't want to say unintended consequences, but are secondary consequences of being able to be a little bit of an olive branch to, let's face it, the majority of the teams in the sport that look at it and say that, we can't really, we just can't really do things in the fall that some of these other programs do. And this does alleviate some of that as well. So it wasn't really necessarily a purpose behind the fall roster limit, but I do think it kind of alleviates some of the concerns that some coaches at the, mid to lower levels of Division I have had for a long time.
Yeah. I'm with you. It serves a lot of purposes. I think, to your point, Joe, like, I'm going to pick 40 as an arbitrary number. The programs beyond the top 40, this would be a real boon for them. So the SEC is our very best conference, right? That's indisputable right now. The 43rd player on an SEC fall roster is not going to play, and they're going to get cut. But that player in like the 16th ranked conference really is a talented player. Like, that player is a real get for them. And hey, if that player does awesome, he could transfer to the SEC down the road. I'm just speaking hypothetically, clearly, but I think that's a real positive. I love the concept of Craig Kylitz and baseball saying, hey, we want to be a pioneer among the other sports not named football and basketball. You've given us a roster limit. We're going to respect that. We know that 34 on December 1st, that's not going away. We would like 4 extra spots because injuries happen the fall, especially in our sport, arm injuries, academic casualties. There's all kinds of things that happen. And then we will get down to 34 on December 1st. And then you're also creating a very reasonable thing for a potential lawsuit where, hey, the family that's suing, they knew they were one of 38 and could be one of 4 people cut. I think that's a very reasonable thing that could be defended. So I think there's a lot of positive. I think, as I understand the plan, Craig Kylitz, if he has the support of the body of coaches, he will take this to the autonomous 4 conference commissioners where they can implement a rule like this. That's part of the autonomy 4. And again, I think it's overall very, very good for the sport. It spreads the talent out because our fall rosters had gotten pretty bloated. And when we cut these kids at the end of the fall semester, they can't play Division I baseball at that point, and that was always kind of a bummer. So it will be interesting.
Yeah, no doubt about that. I think I was, as you were talking, I was thinking of how I've had conversations with coaches that are good programs that are outside of the power structure who say, it's just kind of tough that, we're not necessarily in a position to have 50 some odd players in the fall. So, you have those programs hoarding players that could have come and played for us and been real guys for us. And then, oh, by the way, the guys who we have on campus right now who are really good are going to be on their roster again next year, or they're, because of the portal, right? So some of those programs at kind of the mid-tier were getting hit twice in that way because they didn't have access to a certain player who decided to be player 43 at an SEC or ACC school. They don't have access to that player, but the player they do have access to, if they're good enough, has the opportunity to go to that next level. So, and they should have that opportunity. But if you're a coach, I can understand why that's kind of frustrating that you're already working with a smaller pool, and then that pool gets, somebody's fishing in your pool after that for guys you already have. And it should be, you brought up a good point. One thing I wanted to clarify, because for me in this meeting, it was one of those things, Runes, when you were in school, did you ever have a deal? And you and I are probably not necessarily we're not poster children students. I don't think you and I, but so maybe this is familiar to you as it is for me, where you're in class and you don't really understand exactly the concept they're going over, but you don't want to ask because you're like, oh God, I can't ask what's happening though, because we're too far past it. Yes. Like I don't want to look dumb. I felt that way in the meeting when I was wondering, okay, we decide on this fall roster number and then we do what with it, right? Mm-hmm. And so it was enlightening to hear Craig say, I'm taking this to the autonomous 4 commissioners. And for those who don't know, that's the SEC, ACC, Big 12, Big 10, mostly a football construct, but hey, we're along for the ride here. And they can unilaterally make this change. Mm-hmm. So Craig was clear that I can't guarantee they're going to go along with this, but I am as confident as I could possibly be that they are going to at least consider it. So that's kind of where we are there. But it was good to hear the clarification of, beyond me talking to those 4 commissioners, there is no other level of, like, we don't have to take this back to some other subcommittee or committee or whatever else.
Yep. And just to put a bow on it, I do love that the proactive thinking that's happening here. Basically, coaches and Craig Kylitz as the leader of the ABCA thinking, if we keep having unlimited fall rosters, and now we have to start cutting down to 34 on December 1st, it's not if we get sued by a family that wants to be able to transfer at mid-year. It's a when. And it could be within the next 12 months. Like there's that realization. And so then it becomes, what if that family wins? Now we've totally, now we've created total chaos. And so I love the mentality of, we all agree this is a bad idea, the mid-year transfer. Let's get ahead of this. And so we'll see. Like to your point, a lot of we'll sees. We'll finish with this, Joe. So Tony Vitello gives the talk Friday morning. And a lot of times when the Division I national championship head coach gives this talk, it feels very presidential. It feels very produced. Like clearly the coach has prepped this talk with great. They've put a lot into it. There's elaborate PowerPoints. I mean, it's produced. And I mean that in a good way. Like, why wouldn't you do that? You're going to speak in front of 5,000 people. Tony Vitello is not that guy. He was prepared clearly, but still it was very off the cuff. And, there was a lot of comments about how informal it was, but that's what makes Tony great. Hashtag don't ever change, Tony. That's what I love about him. That's why his in-game interviews are the best we have in our sport, or among the best. That's why he is a rock star. It's like, he should absolutely keep doing what he's doing. One nugget that I took from your article that was really cool about it was I liked that even though Tony has there's a brashness and a bravado there, his reflection, his self-reflection is massively underrated. And for him to say, hey, Dave Serrano, they were starting to make some headway there, and the roster they left us, we had some stuff to work with there. I loved that Tony gave credit to Dave Serrano and his coaching staff, who had some really good people on it. I love that he talks about, hey, like, we got lucky right away. Garrett Crochet was a recruit that we just landed late in the process. So, I love that about Tony. Like, yeah, can he be brash, and can there be some bravado and those types of things? It's got a little WWE feel to it. Absolutely. But is he reflective and like insightful? Heck yeah. Go ahead, Joe. Give me your take.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think this is the presentation, what it lacked maybe in like structure and like a through line, right? And those aren't critiques. I think those are just statements of fact. What it lacked there, I think it kind of made up for, and he just came off as human,
Yeah.
and because of the character, and I use that word specifically, that Tony so often plays during the season, it's easy to not see him as just like a regular, and he's not a regular guy. He's a superstar head baseball coach who's well compensated and successful and famous and all that stuff. But you do see the more human side of him where he's scatterbrained and like, is so amped up to be up there and excited and has nervous energy about him that you can just see it, that like, oh, he's kind of nervous up there. Right. And who wouldn't be? 5,000 of your peers. Right. I mean, that's one of the toughest groups to present to ever, is your peers. Right. So I thought that was actually great to see kind of that human side. And I totally agree with the reflective part of it. I know that they're the people who are still critical of the way they went about business in 2022 and what have you. I don't know exactly what some of it's just sour grapes, but I'm not sure exactly what everybody wants from him in terms of contrition, but he's been pretty open about, like, I think in his post-championship press conference last year in Omaha, he said, like, we've been here a couple times and we did some stuff in the dugout and kind of looked like idiots. And like, he's been pretty open about, like, yeah, we ran pretty hot. And, maybe there were some mistake. Like it just feels like, I mean, maybe he hasn't gone as far as people want him to go there, but like, he is not without the self-awareness of, certain things. And so I thought there was also a quick nugget there too, is that you're reminded, I mean, yes, they are recruiting superstars. Yes, they are putting guys into pro baseball at a crazy clip. They're doing great in the portal, all that stuff. But, Kirby Connell was a guy they took when they first got there because they just needed bodies, frankly. Right. And Chris Stamos was a guy they just kind of like took a flyer on as their last player on the roster. Right. And so, like, it just goes to show that even at that kind of level, the best program in the country last year, depth matters. And finding those like little pieces that you think you can just maybe he's got something he can bring to the table for us. As much as the star power is kind of what drives the bus, when you're talking about winning in Omaha, like the depth ends up mattering, even when you're talking about a team that talented.
Yeah, that's well said. Really well said. Joe, let's finish it with this. So, like the ABCA, I always leave, my heart is full, my bucket is full, like it's just the relationships. So funny. I spent time with Todd Brown, who's the head coach at New Mexico, and his wife. And, I coached at Arizona State. Todd is an Arizona guy. We were 2 finalists for the NDSU job many moons ago, and he became the head coach there, had that great run there. And so I'm talking to Todd and find out that one of his best friends in life was my college teammate, Craig Allen, because they were Cape Cod teammates and tore it up that summer, and they're still in touch to this day. So just like little connections like that. Another one, like just a reminder to all of us coaches that this really is about the relationships. I'm talking to Frank Anderson in the hallway, and then Scott Brown comes by, and so it's the 3 of us talking. And Scott Brown, so think about how intense the Vandy, Tennessee rivalry is. And Scott Brown and Frank clearly have a relationship. And Scott goes, I've got a hilarious story I got to tell you guys. So Scott's son, Nolan, is he's a big time pitcher in the class of 2027. And like Nolan Brown is a stud. And so he'll be pitching somewhere very prominent. And so, think about how intense some of those games have been. And so after one of those games, Scott and Nolan are in the car driving home. And, the Tennessee and the Vanderbilt coaches had been chirping at each other during the game. And so Nolan Brown says to his dad, he says, Dad, got pretty heated between you and the Tennessee coaches. You and Coach Anderson were getting after each other during that game. And Scott's like, yeah, that's right. And Nolan Brown says to his dad, he says, Coach Anderson's a really nice guy, Dad. And Scott Brown says to me and Frank Anderson, he says, now I got a real problem, because I'm not pleased that my son is taking your side, Frank, in this argument, but I'm also immensely pleased and proud that my son has the confidence to tell me, Dad, I think you're the jerk tonight, not Coach Anderson. So, I mean, I almost, lost my breath. I was laughing so hard. But again, like, think about how intense some of these rivalries become. And for me to see Frank Anderson and Scott Brown, the respect that they have for each other in a fun conversation like that, I mean, that just makes me feel so good about our game. And oh man, what a great moment. I wish I could have recorded that.
We are so quick to ascribe when we get these heated rivalries, I think from the outside, we're so quick to ascribe that, oh, there's no love lost there. And and sure, there are coaching staffs and individual coaches who, they don't care for one another, but for the most part, like, it's just competition, and in the heat of competition, people do things and say things that they wouldn't do walking down the street passing that person. Right. So, so that's a good story, because I think it does encapsulate that, like, the heat of competition is pretty hot, but on the other hand, like, these are just kind of, people who just are friends who work in the same industry and sometimes butt heads. Like, that's just kind of the reality of it.
Amen. We always get over it. Yep. Always get over it. Just again, in the spring, when you see the fabulous Roon Dogs chirping at Etheridge Farms, please know that Coach Rooney and Marcus Etheridge are great friends. I would lay down in traffic for Mark Etheridge, but I hope that Etheridge Farms finishes in dead last place and the fabulous Roon Dogs defend our crown. So there you go. Not sure how gracious that was, Joe, but there you have it.
That's all right. Like, again, like you said, he'll get over it. It's fine.
That's it. Oh, well done. Joseph, it was great to see you. I'm so proud of our company. I'm so proud of D1 Baseball. We had a fabulous dinner there, and to see everyone that's part of our company, everyone that's joining our company, so many great announcements coming down the pike. And like Joe said, it is full throttle go time right now. So keep your eyes posted on the website, and we will be in our weekly cadence from here. So that is it. Everybody have a great week, and we will catch you next time on the D1 Baseball Podcast.